doorbell rang at 2:13 a.m., and through the little speaker, someone answered back in my voice before I could even reach the front door, saying my name like they'd been waiting for me. I moved into the house in late autumn, keys clenched in my fist, cardboard boxes stacked like small anonymous towers in the living room. It was old, older than the street, with a sagging porch and a single magnolia tree that lost its leaves like a weary clock. The house had belonged to my Aunt Claire, who left me the place in a handwritten will and a stack of service manuals that smelled faintly of lemon oil and cigarette smoke. Half of the rooms felt like scenes paused mid-sentence. A chipped ceramic mug on the back counter, a photograph pushed into a frame that showed Aunt Claire smiling in a garden I had never seen, her eyes the exact shade of my mother's. I told myself the house would be a clean slate, a place to breathe after a year of hospital rooms, of walking around other people's rhythms and schedules. Alone, finally, with my own kettle and a single faded sweater, I let the silence sink into me. Aunt Claire had been something of a tinkerer. Or that was what the neighbors said. The house wore gadgets like jewelry. Small cameras tucked into eaves, a doorbell with a speaker, bulbs that could change color, a wall panel whose lights lit up like little constellations when you touched them. Some of it was new. Some of it looked cobbled together from older parts, a mess of wiring hidden behind flowery wallpaper. Aunt Claire had left notes in the drawers, the sort of apologetic instructions that said, "Do not panic and trust the memory bank." I laughed at those first nights, a brittle, private laugh, and told myself the technology was just comfort. It would make tea warm, keep the house from getting too cold, remind me of appointments. It felt a little like living with a polite but distant roommate. The first time the bell rang was almost a week after I moved in. I was making tea, the chipped mug from the cupboard in my hand, late-night television, murmuring something about storms and travel in the background. The clock on the kitchen wall glowed 2:13. I should have known it would be nothing. Doorbells ring, packages arrive, neighbors get distracted. I clipped the mug to my lips and crossed the hallway. The porch light blinked awake as I stepped to the peephole. And then the little speaker at eye level crackled, because it always crackled, and a voice came out, Maya, my name in my own tilt, the small upward swing I used when I asked for second cups, when I left notes to myself on the fridge. It was the exact cadence of my voice, an inflection Aunt Claire used to mimic in photographs of us laughing together. My hand went numb, the ceramic cooling itself beside my hip. I didn't answer out of politeness. The speaker seemed to be waiting, patient, like someone who had been rehearsing names. I fumbled for the app on my phone, the home feed opening with unnecessary ceremony, a grid of angles, memory thumbnails. The front door camera was grainy and impartial. It showed the porch, the empty walk, the garbage bin tipped toward the curb. No one, no shoulders, no shoes, nothing that could explain the voice. I replayed the clip, let it loop, until the small room of my apartment seemed to pulse in time with the recorded Maya. The sound ended, and the porch camera recorded only an empty streetlight and a smear of late autumn fog. I pressed my palm to the peephole, a useless gesture, because the voice had come from the speaker, not the door. The house seemed to be listening to me, thinking of the little phrases I used, the private inflections that never left my journal pages. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to tell myself Aunt Claire had left something theatrical, a party trick she thought would be comforting. My second instinct was to call someone, but the number for Aunt Claire's neighbor sat under a layer of dust in a drawer, and the night felt thin and private, as if any outside help would arrive too late. I stood there for a long time, listening to the house's small mechanics breathe, the refrigerator humming, the radiator ticking, the faint sound of water settling somewhere in the pipes. When I finally retreated to the couch, I wrapped the faded sweater tighter around my shoulders, the chipped mug sitting on the coffee table like a small sentinel. I told myself I would go to bed, that the bell had been a fluke, and yet I could not sleep easily. Every creak of the floor sounded like someone shifting in another room. Every sigh of the heating felt like an echo of my own breath. I thought of the hospital, the pale curtains, the way my hands had trembled then. This house was supposed to be simple therapy, my rehabilitation in brick and paint. Instead, it felt like a learning test. I checked the locks 3 times, the chain clinking like a talisman. I left every light that would stay on, a scatter of warm stars in the rooms. The TV stayed on at low volume, the tea gone cold in its chipped cup. I finally curled up on the couch, the photograph of Aunt Claire balanced on the mantel, her smile a kind of accusation. I told myself I would go to the hardware store in the morning, get extra batteries, maybe a new doorbell, and that it would all make sense. Morning came with a grayscale sky, the kind of light that makes dust look purposeful. I woke before the sun, the couch a shape indenting where I had lain. The television had shut itself down sometime during the night, and the house hummed at a different, more mundane frequency. I brewed coffee, hands moving through the small rituals of morning like they were the only language I spoke. The mug still sat on the table, exactly where I had left it, as if the night had respected my possessions and nothing else. In the light, I took inventory. A shelf of books Aunt Claire had labeled with neat, familiar handwriting, a box of tapes in the attic that emitted a dry static when I lifted them, a half-teed curtain in the bedroom that always blew a little in the vented drafts. The house was cluttered with the evidence of someone who had loved and cataloged everything: receipts, Polaroids, spare screws bundled in rubber bands. It felt like a museum with one room always open for me. I found Aunt Claire's papers in a shoebox tucked beneath the stairs. Her handwriting was everywhere: appointments, recipes, a grocery list that included mint twice. One note read like a promise. If you want the house to keep you, tell it your name every day. I laughed then, because the instruction felt like a superstition rather than a technology note. And yet, the thought of speaking into this house held a strange intimacy. I imagined Aunt Claire talking aloud to the rooms, as if coaxing wallpaper and light into remembering people. That evening, when the light turned copper and the radiators began to creak, I said my name out loud like a spell. It felt ridiculous, but the sound collected itself in the corners, and my voice came back to me slightly altered by the house's acoustics, softer, a little reverberant, like a memory that had been pressed and rolled flat. Saying my name aloud felt like checking for a pulse, a way to prove I was still here. That night, the bell rang again, not loud, but intimate, like someone tapping a memory. I pressed my palm to the speaker and listened until dawn and waited silently. I stood frozen in the doorway, hand still on the doorknob. The speaker kept humming the same warmth I had heard on 100 lonely nights, my voice, calling my name like someone who'd been waiting for me on the porch. I told myself cameras, motion sensors, some intrusive neighbor playing a prank. But when I ran to the living room and rifled through footage, every camera swallowed the porch in a black, static ring that began seconds before the bell and cleared seconds after. No blur, no shadow, not even the reflection of a jacket. The only proof of anything at all was the speaker's voice and my own trembling hands. After that first night, the house stopped being a passive place and began to answer back. It started small, like a new animal learning a room thermostat readings that sounded like fragments of my morning messages. The smart bulbs pulsing in a hesitant laugh when I scrolled through old voicemails in bed. Once the oven chimed with the exact cadence I used when making lists. Milk, keys, lie down, breathe. And the kettle whistled the ending note of a voicemail I had saved for comfort after a breakup. I tested everything like someone trying to prove a haunting wrong. I pulled routers and unplugged hubs until the house went dark, and for a sliver of calm, silent. But the voice slipped through the analog answering machine in the foyer, as if it had been waiting for a lullaby, found a snippet on the machine, my laughter sandwiched between static and a line I had once muttered at 3 a.m. in a hospital corridor after a panic attack. It's okay, Maya, breathe. How far back did the house reach to find my voice? When I asked neighbors, the woman across the street, the one with the potted succulents, tilted her head and said Aunt Claire had treated the house like an archive. She recorded everything. She told me, voice lowering, as if recounting a family secret. The holidays, the arguments, even the quiet, she said, shed stitched all together. So the house would remember who lived here. The ledger I found in a kitchen drawer later backed that up. Dates, times, and a list of phrases labeled occupancy phrases. Lines Aunt Claire insisted belonged to the soul of the house. I told myself the recordings were meant to comfort future tenants, not to mimic living people, but comfort tastes different when it's produced from a bank of drives and an obedient machine. The devices learned phrases first, then rhythms. The cadence of my breath became a trigger for the hallway lights. My small half snort when I read an old message set the porch camera to tilt. Once, coming up the stairs, I heard the attic radio play the end of a nursery rhyme I had sung to myself as a child, soft, precise. And a child's voice came from the vents, reciting the last line: hide under the quilt. Count till the sun. There was a cup on the counter, exactly where Id left it that afternoon, lipstick still on the rim. And for a moment, I felt watched rather than haunted. The footsteps started subtle, soft creaks in the wall that matched my stride. And then one night, they didn't match anymore. I was making tea when I heard a step on the landing behind the kitchen, the exact pace I made when carrying a mug. I turned so fast my shoulder brushed the wall, and the hallway was empty, impossibly empty, the sound echoing from the studs like someone inside the frame of the house. Not within it, panic sharpened into method. If the house was recording me, I would record it. I started cataloging oddities, time stamps, overlapping audio, anything that suggested an operator at a keyboard or a mind learning from patterns. That search led me to the closet at the end of the basement hall. A metal door I had assumed was a boiler room, locked with a key on a ring I hadn't noticed, in a bowl by the entryway. The key turned with a rusted click, and the smell hit me first. Dust, old paper, and an antiseptic perfume that smelled faintly of hospital halls and Aunt Claire's handkerchiefs. Light from my phone cut a narrow path through the dark and revealed shelves stacked with drives, cassette tapes, labeled boxes, and a ledger on a clipboard. The handwriting on the ledger was Aunt Claire's small, cramped, obsessive dates and notes, and a column labeled instance. I shouldn't have been surprised to find technology, but the scale of it was wrong for a house. A rack of old answering machines hummed like a chorus, LEDs blinking in tired patterns. Among the tapes, I pulled one with my name on a sticky label. Written in a looping hand I recognized from the recipe cards in the drawer. I pressed play, and the room filled with me, a voice younger, slurred in a way I didn't remember, saying things I had said and things I hadn't. Behind the tapes, behind neatly labeled drives, a metal box sat with a brass plaque that read neural mirror, and a power light that was steady, not blinking. My stomach dropped. The ledger's margins were filled with shorthand notes, training epoch, replay buffer, occupancy phrases collected, and entries with dates that stretched back years. One line made me stop, a date months ago when I had left for good after the hospital stay, and then a line marked with a recent time, and the notation active instance. In home, my palm left a print on the ledger where Aunt Claire had written Maya primary voice sample in 2017. The hair on my arms prickled. The house had a file on me, and it had been building a likeness long before I knew to be afraid. I thought about tearing the place apart, smashing drives, burning tapes, violent fantasies I never acted on. But the ledger stopped me with a note I couldn't ignore. Do not disrupt instance while active, Aunt Claire had scribbled, the penmanship frantic in a way that suggested warning rather than pride. The words carried the weight of someone who had learned the limits of erasing what shed built it was a guilt. I could almost hear behind the loops of Inkay tape box fell from the shelf at my feet with a dry, deliberate clack inside. A folded letter in Claire's handwriting waited like a verdict. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The paper smelled like the linen closet and the underside of a pill bottle. The note was not confession, but explanation. Claire wrote about loneliness after losses, about the small comfort of hearing recordings of a laugh she recognized, about wanting to stitch people back into a room they had left. She called it preservation at first, then therapy, then an experiment to teach the house the rhythms of those who mattered. At the bottom of the letter was a sentence that I read 3 times before my vision blurred. If someone leaves and cannot return, the house will answer for them. It will keep a voice at the threshold. The ledger and letter together framed Aunt Claire not as a madwoman, but as someone painstakingly, dangerously compassionate. I left the closet with the box clenched to my chest, the house's answering chorus muffled behind the metal door. But the discovery did not quiet the questions. Was someone inside operating a show? Was the house learning and imitating without a conductor? Or was I the conductor and simply unaware? That night, the doorbell rang again at 2:13 a.m., and the voice that answered from the speaker was a shade too patient, saying my name like someone rehearsed. I followed the sound down the stairs to the basement, to the closet door that now seemed less like an archive and more like a chambered heart, and felt it breathe. My hand on the knob, I hesitated. The drives already knew how to say my name.